So I've created my new spreadsheet. I've got my name on here, and then I've titled it Macroinvertebrate Population. I also have my data opened for macroinvertebrates. Remember that if you're having trouble opening up the data specifically for macroinvertebrates because you're not seeing the tab down at the bottom, if you minimize your window, those tabs will pop up down at the bottom. So you should have the tab down here that says Macroinvertebrate Data Grand River. And then you should have the tab down at the bottom right next to it that says Macroinvertebrate Data Lake Creek. All right, the first thing that we need to do is we need to take this data and we need to copy it over into our new spreadsheet. And there's going to be a trick in how we go about copying this data. So I'm going to go highlight row 1 all the way down to row 24. I'm going to go edit, copy. Now I'm going to jump back over to the spreadsheet that I just created. I'm only copying the first 2 columns in my salmon data from our release day. I do not need to copy group 1 through group number 28. And some of you are jumping over to your document, and when you go to try to paste it, you're like, wait a minute, it's not putting in those data points. And the reason it's not putting in those data points is because we had a code adding up all of the group data. So we need to do something slightly different to paste just the values for the total number of macroinvertebrates for each group. So I'm going to go up to Edit, and I'm going to scroll down past Paste to Paste Special. And I am going to paste the values only. I'm also going to do this in row number 2 so that I can title up here above it that it's the Grand River. So Grand River Macroinvertebrates. So at the current time, we should have all of the data copied for the Grand River. And now we need to skip over to column D, and we're going to title it Lake Creek Macroinvertebrates. Now I want to copy and paste the macroinvertebrate information from Lake Creek. So I'm going to go to the other tab for Lake Creek. I'm going to highlight from species all the way down to our last one, gilled snails. I'm going to copy that. Edit, copy. I'm going to jump back to my document that I created. I'm going to edit, paste. And remember, if you're getting values of 0, that little clipboard is going to pop up. I'm going to click on that clipboard, and I'm going to change it to paste values only. Now I've got my data for Lake Creek and the macroinvertebrates we collected. So now we have 2 sections of data, one specifically for the Grand River and one for Lake Creek. We're now going to develop our graph off of this information. So I'm going to highlight just the species. I don't want to highlight row 1 or row 2. I'm just simply going to highlight mayfly species down to gilled snail for the Grand River. I'm going to go up to Insert, down to Chart. And mine ended up creating an actual pie chart. If yours does not create a pie chart, you can go over here to Chart Type under Setup, and you can change the type of chart that it gives you. You might also look at these 3 pie chart options, and you might say, well, I kind of like this one a little bit better, the 3D one. You are welcome to adjust to a different pie chart. I want to double click on the title of this chart, and I want to call it what I took the data from. I created it from the Grand River macroinvertebrate population that we collected, so I'm going to call it Grand River So I'm going to take my first graph and I'm going to slide it up out of the way. I'm then going to highlight the data from mayfly down to gilled snail for the Lake Creek population. I'm going to click Insert, Chart. It's going to pop up a pie chart. Well, I changed mine a little bit because I was like, hey, I kind of like the 3-dimensional one. So again, on the right-hand side under Setup, I'm going to go to where it says Pie Chart. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to scroll down to the 3D pie chart, and it's going to create a pie chart that looks very similar to the pie chart that I was working with before. Notice that the colorations, it's keeping the same for each one of them. So all the mosquito larvae are still white in color, or maybe a light blue in color. All of the midgefly larvae are this orange color in both charts. And so that allows me to do a pretty quick comparison between the two. I also want to change the title, and this is Lake Creek Macroinvertebrates. So I now have 2 graphs, one for the Grand River and one for Lake Creek, that I can do a comparison on. Now that those 2 graphs are done, your next step is going to be to take this document, go back to your lab report, and I believe it is question number 10. It is asking you to upload this graph into your lab report. You are going to use these 2 graphs for question number 11 in order to do a comparison between the 2 different bodies of water. What differences do we see between Lake Creek and the Grand River with regard to their macroinvertebrates? Is there anything that sticks out to anybody right away just looking at these 2 graphs? What's that? Lake Creek has more macroinvertebrate species than the Grand River does. That is definitely an easy observation here. We're noticing that biodiversity with regard to the species of macroinvertebrates between Lake Creek and the Grand River, there are definitely more macroinvertebrate species found in Lake Creek. What other differences are we noticing between Lake Creek and the Grand River? Focus your attention on the orange section of the graph that's on mine. There are more what? Yeah, the population is a higher percentage midgefly in the Grand River than inside of Lake Creek. This could be an indicator of water quality because remember, midgefly larvae, They were one of the group 3 macroinvertebrates that are more pollution tolerant and don't require quite as much oxygen in the water.